Thank you all for joining us for this, the first lecture in the Games Institute lecture series put on by the organized by the Anti-Racism, Decolonization, Equity, Diversity, Inclusivity Committee, which is generously housed and supported and funded by the Games Institute. I'll note that this speaker series is also funded in part by a SSHRC, a SHRC connection grant. And I'm very happy today to welcome Elaine Gómez to welcome Elaine Gómez for the first lecture in this series. I do want to start by acknowledging that we're gathered here, some of us on and all of us using resources that are extracted from the traditional territories of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, caretakers of this land since time immemorial. I hope that in addition to acknowledging this fact and how we benefit from this ongoing displacement, that this series of speakers and workshops will also help us move towards concrete action for reconciliation by learning about and exploring how power and privilege are implicated in our professional values and practices. Given my own positionality as a cisgendered man, as a person of East Asian heritage who's often treated as a white person, as a disabled person, but also a person with the privilege of relatively stable employment. Given this positionality, I try to understand my own work as contributing to a social good. But if that work doesn't include, if that social good doesn't include or address those pushed to the margins, then who is it really working for? We don't want to be the intellectual wing of settler colonialism, of white supremacy, or of heteropatriarchy. So it's so incredibly important that our work towards that social good does include those who have been left out of the definition of we for so long. I hope this series of speakers and workshops in this work and this talk by Elaine Gómez in particular can help us become more reflexive about our relationships with these communities and the people that we share our world with. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Elaine Gómez, who is a prominent figure within the digital works community and a co-founder of LatinX in Gaming. As a Latina, she has lived experience within the games industry as well as being an independent Unity developer and games educator. And through this presentation today, she'll do some work to connect cultural appropriation and representation in games with other digital works. So please join me in welcoming Elaine Gómez with a rousing round of applause, perhaps through the emoji reactions, or our friends at the, I would be remiss not to note that in addition to the folks who are joining us online, our friends at the Tag Lab at the University of Concordia in Montreal, and our friends at UC Irvine are also joining us remotely with several more participants in those spaces. So welcome all, and especially welcome Elaine Gómez.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here today. I was supposed to actually fly in from New Jersey, and I think it's like snowing and like all that other stuff. So all the flights got canceled, and that's why we're here in digital space instead. But I'm so glad to be here and really excited to share a little bit about my life. When I give talks and when I'm on panels and such, I like to speak from my heart. I don't like to be, not necessarily that I don't like to be professional, because I am professional, but definitely I like to be more personable and really just show myself and my personality when I'm talking about stuff. So definitely in advance, I apologize if I get emotional or if I touch on something that is a little bit hard, because I'm sharing pieces of me and what I have experienced in my life with you, and opening up my heart, right? So I apologize if I do cry or something. It's happened before, but they're happy tears because it's looking back at all that stuff that I have been through and seeing where I am today. It's something really special. So I'm happy to share that with y'all. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen real quick to have the slide deck up. Great. So I titled this talk for today, The Impact of Genuine and Mindful Inclusion of Marginalized Communities in Creative Works. And the reason why I called it Creative Works, it's because it's not just about games, it's about film and music as well, and all other media that we absorb and are into and create as people, right? And that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about all those things, not just games, but definitely honing in on games since I am a game designer and like this is a talk hosted by Games Institute. So a little bit about me really quickly. My name's Elaine Gómez-Sanchez. I'm a senior game designer at Brass Lion Entertainment, and I am co-founder of LatinX and Gaming, which is a nonprofit based in the United States that also serves Latin Americans inside the games industry, and not just those who participate as developers, but journalists, esports, athletes, content creators, like you name it. If you are involved in games somehow, we house community for Latina identifying peoples. So a little bit deeper about what it means to be a senior game designer, like a little bit about my life before I really start talking. So I started working at Brass Lion in 2021. And the reason why I decided to start working there was because at my previous studio, I was surrounded by a lot of people who were not like me, right? A lot of cis white men. And that is great because I learned a lot, right, from people who had been in the industry for, decades and had a lot of knowledge to impart into me. But I definitely felt othered. I definitely felt alone. And for a long time, I was starting to feel like I didn't belong. And that my voice didn't matter, that I was just another number that was there to help with whatever it is that they wanted to do, not necessarily feeling uplifted and empowered to grow and be myself in this place. So I really tried to find a place that would celebrate me for me and would respect me for everything that I had to give. And I'm really, really happy that I was able to find Brass Lion Entertainment, which is a predominantly I guess I would say it's a studio for people of color and by people of color is like the best thing that I could say. 80 to 85% of us are people of color. So I've never been on a design team where there's people from all walks of life and all ages, but also all backgrounds and all skin tones. And it's fantastic to be able to share in that and really talk about complicated things on a daily basis because we feel safe to do so. And in there, we're creating a game that I can't really talk about because it's under NDA, but it is an action RPG with some anime aesthetics, and it's been really, really great to build something from the ground up with this incredible team. So as a senior game designer, I do two things. I both design a lot of aspects of the game that have to do with non-combat type of design. So exploration, social design, thinking about progression and working with live ops and the progression designer to figure out how we can surface the player experience. Those are the types of things that I concentrate in as a game designer at Brass Lion. And I also lead our accessibility design strike team. So that means in all facets of the game, how can we make it as accessible as possible? So I'm constantly working with the UI UX team and other folks who are interested in accessibility to try to figure out how we can incorporate accessibility from the design of the game and the systems that we're creating to limit, for example, difficulty or like access, not difficulty of access, but rather making the gameplay itself more easier to understand or more fluid or more simple so that everybody can play. So it's a really big pillar of mine in my design work. So that's kind of like what I do on a day-to-day. We talk a lot to people about accessibility, do a lot of exploration design in engine and out of engine, a lot of documenting, and of course, as a senior, that means also leading. So that means having conversations with people on a daily basis, sometimes all day. That means conflict resolution. That means listening to people if they are upset about something that I may have said or some feedback that I may have given, and reconciling all those things to make sure that we're still working as a team and that everybody feels respected and heard. It's a lot of things, but I'm really happy that I'm here as a senior game designer working on a really dope project. Independently, I'm very lucky that Brass Lion allows me to create games outside of work. There's a lot of studios, especially in AAA, that do not allow you to do that. So I can do freelance work. I can get paid for it. I can do game jams, and I can take courses to make games and stuff. I can do anything that I want as professional development, which has been really great for me so that I can continue to grow outside of my job. And then outside of that, I did co-found LatinX and gaming with some friends. And having a nonprofit is hard, right? Because we are serving other people, not ourselves. So it's constantly thinking about ways to bridge the gap and to overcome challenges with and for other people, and being an advocate for those who may not be an advocate for themselves or perhaps don't feel the strength to be able to do that. And that's why I involved myself in different orgs. One of them is Code Coven, which is based out of the UK, that offers courses and game development resources to marginalized communities. I'm involved with gay gaming professionals and the work that they're doing there in different initiatives when it comes to game development, and even helping with their website, for example. As long as I can help in some way, I'm happy to give my time. And of course, also the Puerto Rican Game Developers Association, because I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and they are starting to grow and do a lot of cool things on the island. And I try to help as much as I can, whether that be a mentor for an event or speak at an event. I try to do whatever I can to be useful. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell, and all the things that I'm involved in, all the things that I enjoy. Um, so we start this talk. Like I said, I was born in Puerto Rico. I put Dominican Republic here as well because that's where my father is from. So on my father's side, he is African indigenous, Afro blood through slavery. That has to be acknowledged because all of us in the Caribbean islands have very mixed blood. We have mostly West African descent, indigenous descent, and European descent. I'm European descent from my mother's side, all the way back to I think being in Spain, like people who would come to work and build in the haciendas and create crops and farms and things like that. So I personally have a very complicated history and experience with my own identity because I have to reconcile, like, I have blood of the colonizer and I have blood of the colonized. And how do I, as a person living in 2023, how do I honor my ancestors and the people who have come before me who have suffered and experienced trauma? What can I do to serve my community and give back and make sure that I remember my history and I remember what my family has gone through. But that's all in all, it has really formed me. A lot of the history of my island and the politics surrounding Puerto Rico, the complexities of being a Latina who speaks English well. And I say quotations because I learned English at an early age, and other people have not had that privilege. But speaking well or looking white, being white passing, and still not being born here in the United States, but not being viewed as a Latina either because Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. So I'm not Latina enough for some Latinos, but I am not American enough either, even though I am an American citizen. So it's a very complicated thing, and definitely has been part of me, and it comes out in many ways, especially creatively, where I try to dissect some of all those complexities. So in 2001, my family moved from Puerto Rico. Here's a picture of San Juan. It's El Morro. If any of you have listened to Bad Bunny and any of his music, he has shot a lot of music videos in that neighborhood in the background there that has like all the colorful buildings. It's called La Perla, which is a community that is very low income, very poor. They're kind of like the slums, but it's a beautiful place to be. Just don't go in there if you're not invited. But I grew up in close to the metro area, which is where San Juan is. The beautiful coast, the beautiful water, where it's sunny and warm all day long. And in 2001, we moved to New Jersey, United States, where everything felt the same. Everything was so monotonous. All the houses looked the same. Everybody looked similar. And my family and I stuck out like a sore thumb. And it was a difficult time. Like, I was only 11 years old, and I was, you know, trying to figure out like my own place in this new world, because it really honestly felt like a completely new world. The air smelled different, the weather was different. My family, my mom grew up in a military base, so she spoke English well, and I spoke English fairly well coming from bilingual school, but my father did not dominate English. So I had an immigrant experience, even though I technically only moved from one US territory to another. It's almost like moving from state to state. But as a family, we experienced what it was like leaving your home country for another, and not having family around, not having friends, not being able to even find ingredients that we would use to make our food nearby, that we would have to drive into, half an hour or even into New York City to find certain things back in the day to be able to make the food that we are used to eating every day. So it was a very tough transition. And it was the very first time in my life that I felt othered, because being in Puerto Rico, I'm just Puerto Rican. Everybody else is Puerto Rican. We all speak Spanish. We can all speak to the same culture, the same experience in society, the same food. There's so much that brings us together because we're all from the same place. But it was the very first time that I felt marginalized. Now, all of a sudden, I wasn't just Puerto Rican, and I wasn't just a young girl who's Puerto Rican and half Dominican, even, right? I was Latina. I was non-native English speaker. I was an immigrant, right? I was all of these labels that I never even heard of, and honestly, I didn't even understand when I first moved at 11 years old. When people are starting to say like, "Oh, but you don't look Latina. Oh, but your skin is not caramel or is not brown. Your hair is not curly. So how can you be X, Y, Z?" And I questioned myself a lot. I was just like, "Who am I?" And what do I do with like all of these labels? And I started to feel very isolated. I was very much in a place where I didn't. In Puerto Rico, we have a saying, "Ni soy de aquí, ni soy de allá," which means I am neither from here nor from there. And I started to really, really feel that a lot growing up. And it even including in circles like extracurricular activities, like even trying to join like a sports team, like I felt that isolation, even though you're supposed to feel like you're in a team, because you get othered because you're different than everybody else, or you have a little bit of an accent. The food that I brought to school, right? I had to stop bringing like rice and beans and like protein, which is what we would normally eat in Puerto Rico. Like at the cafeteria, the school cafeteria would give you like a whole tray of rice and beans and greens and protein. And that was just normal. But when I would bring my little like Tupperware with my rice and beans, like I always used to get made fun of at school because it was too strong smelling. It was too exotic. And like, why would you eat rice and beans for lunch? Like, that's dinner food. Even just a little thing like that, like really affected me. And I didn't know what to do with myself for a long time. And I ended up just like assimilating. So I started bringing peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to school. I started dressing like everybody else so that I would stick out less and less and less. And I could just survive. I could survive being around school, could survive not getting made fun of. I could survive just being unique, just by trying to be like everybody else. So, what did I do with all of these things? And again, this is my personal experience. I cannot speak to other marginalized people. I cannot speak to their experiences and how they were able to overcome this, or their trauma, or their life experiences. This is just all me and how it may influence, right, our creativity. Um, But I came to this question, like, what do I do with all of this? I have a few choices. I can wallow in it. I can wallow in the misery, and I can wallow in the negativity. I could use it as a catalyst for good, so that I can create spaces and I can create experiences for the people around me that fight against how I felt. Or I can use it as a catalyst for negativity to really put the blame and point the finger at people who have hurt me, at experiences that have hurt me, and take that bitterness and take all of that anger, um, and use it for something else. So those are really all the avenues that I could have gone down, right? Um, and I started trying to figure out, well, what do I carry? And this, by the way, these are all things that I only but recently in the last few years have been able to kind of figure out on my own. It's like, what is it that I'm carrying, right, into the work that I create, into the conversations that I start with people. There are the labels, everything that I mentioned, right? Being Latina, being non-native speaker, being an immigrant, all of these things, the trauma. And it's not my own personal trauma, like even just as little as getting made fun of for bringing food at school, but it's the generational trauma of the history of my people, the history of my island, knowing what it means to carry the Puerto Rican flag, and the pain that comes along with it, because for a long time even displaying the Puerto Rican flag on my island was illegal. The United States made that illegal for decades, and now it's not. So it's just like, what does it mean to hold my flag and be proud of where I came from? The biases that come, right, from moving from one country to another, um, being like, okay, like I am Puerto Rican born, but anybody who's in New York who's Puerto Rican, you're not really Puerto Rican. You're New Yorican. You don't understand what it's like to be on the island, and carrying those biases and having to break them, right? My own dreams, my aspiration, my hopes, my expectations of how I want to be treated and how I want to treat other people, I carry all those things, and we all carry all those things. This is not just for a marginalized person like myself, it's all of us. We all carry this. And when we talk about inclusion and diversity and equity, we have to understand that when we are really wanting to be genuine and mindful about being inclusive, it means that you are acknowledging and you're understanding that I am carrying and that other people are carrying all of these things. You cannot pick and choose the good things about somebody's culture or somebody's personality and only fixate on that. You have to remember everything else that comes with it, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because that really is truly seeing somebody for what they're worth and helping them be seen. And this is really tough, right? Because more often than not, we don't want to face the negative. We don't want to face the ugly. We don't want to look inside that, what's behind that door, right? Or open up Pandora's box, like some people say. But it is critical in order to understand and make people feel that they matter, that you are seeing past the superficial and going in a layer deeper into who they really are and what has made them, and what has brought them to where they are today. So this is really important. And honestly, this right here, if you take away only just one thing, just remember this slide, because this is going to be like the foundation for literally everything that I'm going to be sharing in a little bit. Um, so I had kind of like try to dissect, well, how does impact, right? When we're being mindful and genuine of representing, of telling stories, of being authentic, what is the impact that that has on our life as a creative, right? And I found kind of three things in my life. So I'm not speaking from personal experience, but I'm sure this can be something that everybody can relate to as well. But these for me were the three things. There's a pivoting point. At some place in your life, you're going to face an experience or go through something or see something that is going to change your life. And that is the pivoting point. Uh, Creativity is an extension of self. That is everything in creating games and creating music and creating film and creating art. You are giving a piece of you for people to see. You are expressing how you feel. You're telling the story, or being able to embrace an experience in a certain way and allow somebody to experience it with you. And then there's influence, which is like, how do you take all of those things and turn them for good and impact somebody's life, right? That's where the social change comes from. So these are the three things that I'm kind of going to discuss in the next few slides. So the pivoting point. The pivoting point can be so many things. A lot of times it's a negative thing. For some people, it can be something that somebody said. They said, no, you cannot, you will never be XYZ. I don't believe you. Or perhaps something that a parent said, right? Or something that a parent did. And you decided for yourself, I'm never going to be like XYZ. I'm never going to do XYZ. I'm never going to say that. It could literally be anything. So it takes many forms. It could be an event such as this one that could be life changing for you, that you heard somebody that really inspired you and motivated you, and now you are fired up and hyped up to do something. It could be a piece of media, right? Watching a movie, watching a show, watching a documentary, watching the news. It could be anything that is creative that has come from somebody that has motivated you and really giving you a U-turn. It could be a personal experience, like I said, something that you went through, something that was said, whether it be negative or positive. And there's a representation. When you see somebody do something that looks like you, and all of a sudden it inspired you to change something about your life, or change careers, or pursue something that you weren't even thinking about before, but seeing that person made all the difference. So these are all the forms of the pivoting point. And how does that impact creative works? Well, it impacted me in the form of Dr. Joe Sanchez. Dr. Joe Sanchez was the only Latina educator in my whole life, outside of being in Puerto Rico, of course, but in living in the United States. He was the only academic teacher, mentor that I had who was a Mexican, who I could relate to on a deeper level than just a superficial, and who saw my potential as a Latina, as a creative, as an intellectual, and gave me wings to fly. And it was only through his, and of course, I'm not saying that my parents were encouraging or that friends were encouraging, because yes, it's very true. My parents always believed in me, and they always told me that I could do anything that I wanted to be, and that I was a go-getter, and like I could do it. But Dr. Joe Sanchez was really special because he opened the door to many things that other people may have never opened the door for. And to me, that was in the form of research. He extended an opportunity to me to be able to go to a university and do a research program for marginalized students. And that opened the door for me to apply to graduate school and learn game design and get to where I am today. So to me, he was my pivoting point, and it was a little bit of everything, because it was the representation of seeing him as a Latino professor who could understand where I was coming from, who could understand my immigrant story, who could understand the bullying that comes with it and the ostracization that comes from all of that. But it was also like him being my TA and just being present at like an event, right? Like a course or a class. There was many forms that Dr. Sanchez was my pivoting point for me, and influenced me to being here and creating games. The second thing would be creativity as an extension of self. I always dislike when I read posts online where people say, stop putting political stuff in games. Like, games are not for that. They're escape from reality. But that couldn't be further from the truth, because every single person making a game or a piece of media is a living human being, and they are experiencing something. They're getting influenced by something. They are hurting in some way, and they have something to say. So it is impossible to divorce creativity from self, because it is an extension of self. And we see it a lot in music. And these are just some albums that I enjoy. But I see it a lot in like metal. I'm a big metalhead. And I love rock. I love heavy music. And it's always an extension of how you feel, your mental health, like in Linkin Park, where they talk about mental health. They talk about things that other people didn't talk about. And people could relate so much so, because they were really extending themselves into the lyrics that they were writing and into the riffs that they were creating with the music. Same thing with like Kendrick Lamar, same thing with Beyonce, when they go through experiences of being hurt by other people, of using substances, right, and getting over that and telling the story of what that was like. It's really powerful the way that we can use our our experiences and what we have been through into and extending it to a creativity such as music in a way that it impacts millions of people, where people can relate and feel connected to somebody that they have never and may never even meet ever in their life. But they feel seen and heard through their music. The same thing happens with film. How many films have we seen that have made us cry or have moved us emotionally in such a way because the story that was told is so relatable, right? And something that we can see ourselves go through or have seen ourselves go through. I'm not Mexican, but when I watched Coco, I cried like 3 times. And it was because I could feel that sense of family, the importance of needing love from the people that you surround yourself with. That was very, very moving. And again, it's an extension of the creator's creativity and their selves and their experiences and what they value. So it really, if we stop seeing creative works as just a superficial thing that we can just consume and absorb, and we go a little layer deeper and we see the people who are creating these works and what they have been through, we really can start seeing the impact that they're leaving behind for us to experience. And the motivation and encouragement that we can get from these works into our own lives so that we can create out then from that is super powerful and life changing. And I know a lot of these movies have done that for so many people. And lastly, games. When it comes to seeing just yourself on screen or somebody that looks like you, the feeling is absolutely incredible, especially because when you play a game, you have to fully immerse yourself in it. It's not like in a film where you are passively participating. You're watching things unfold, and the story is unraveling before your eyes. With a game, you have to actively participate in it. You are making the choices. You are moving around. You are choosing to inspect or read certain things. It's very active and it's very intentional, and being able to play as somebody else, where you can see a little piece of you in there, where you can see a little bit of your story in that, really is something unlike any other piece of media can do. And it's why I advocate so much that when we create games, or when we consult for games, or when we consume games that other people have made, that we really choose to see it with a lens of what was the intention behind this story, this character? What is the creative team trying to tell me? What are they trying to communicate? It's not just a cool story. It's not just a dope environment. It's always a bit deeper than that. And reading between the lines can really make the world of a difference for you to understand what the dev team poured their hours and their lives to in creating that project. Um, so for me in my life, this took the form in a project that I made last year, a very short project called The Gigantes. So I extended myself in a way that I never have before in a game. And again, I do make games outside of work because there's certain things that I cannot explore at my job, right? But in this game, I fully immerse myself in Puerto Rican culture, and digitally created the craft of making a Vejigante mask. So in Puerto Rico, these masks are worn at carnivals and festivals, and they're very much a piece of our cultural identity. And people hang them on their walls. They come in all different colors and shapes, and they can represent different colors, can mean certain things. But I chose to use the mask crafting that is of African descent, where they take a coconut shell, and they uh, grind it and they remove all of the fibers and they cut it, and it's very labor intensive. But I chose to use the coconut mask instead of the paper mache, which is more of the European kind, because I really wanted to embrace the African and indigenous roots of the art of Puerto Rico. And that's why like the characters are brown, because I wanted to tell a little bit about that, the African and indigenous peoples of my island. And that's like my father's skin color and like my father's side skin color. And I don't see that a lot in games. When people think about a Puerto Rican, they don't think about Afro-Puerto Rican really. So I really wanted to tell something special and different with that. And I was able to extend myself and like my history and watch people play this game who were not Puerto Rican, and have them give me my feedback and help them, I don't know, experience something that they may never even see before because maybe they would never go to Puerto Rico. But in this digital experience, they were able to absorb a little bit of what makes Puerto Rico so beautiful and special. And that meant the world to me. And lastly, influence. So with the pivoting point and with the creativity and how we have able to extend a piece of us to the creative stuff that we create comes influence. It's the fact that with something that you do, with something that you say, you can really create a life-changing experience for someone. You could create a pivoting point in somebody's life with the creativity and the stuff that you bring forth into the world. So how have I been able to do that? With all of my labels and all the things that I have been through with my pivoting point and with my extension of creativity in the games that I create, and the time that I have given to create community, I've been able to influence by creating LatinX in gaming. Um, Even though Latinx in gaming wasn't for me, actually, in fact, Latinx in gaming was created out of the lack of a community from existing, right? We didn't see anything for Latinos in the United States, and we decided to do it ourselves we wouldn't, so that somebody else wouldn't feel as alone as we did when we first started. And that has opened a door for so many things. I've been able to speak at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and speak to senators and people in power about the Latino experience in the United States and what it's like being a Latina game designer making games about cultural things and how that can be used for good. I've been able to speak to kids. I've been able to speak to high schoolers. I've been able to speak to college students. I've been able to speak to other game developers. I've been able to speak to parents of kids and people from all ages and walks in life, to let them know that like, hey, like games are just my medium of expressing who I am and what I have on the inside. And it's so powerful and it makes me feel like I was made for this, right? But that anybody else could use that for their own good. They could write a book, they could write an essay, they could write an article, they can make a short film. Anything creative that comes out of the heart can be used for good and can be used as influence to really impact the lives around you. But if it wasn't for all these things, both negative and positive, all of my pivots, all of my experiences, all of the games that I have created and the games that I have not created that are stuck somewhere on my computer in a hard drive. If it wasn't for all these things, I wouldn't be here today and I wouldn't be able to inspire other people to create and to really see other communities as much more than just superficial difference, more than just a skin tone, more than just a cool colors. It's way deeper than that. It's celebrating our histories and our ancestors, making sure that we don't forget the bad so that we can celebrate the good. And that it's all connected, and that's all included in the package. It's not just picking and choosing. So I'll leave you with this. Really, truly, after all of this stuff that I said, the impact of genuine and mindful inclusion of marginalized communities and creative works has the power to create social change through empathy. So it's literally like I said earlier today. I was speaking from my heart. I'm sharing my experience and my life with you in hopes that it can empower you, in hopes that it can inspire you and help you see that I am more than just a meets the eye. I'm much more than just a senior game designer. I am much more than just a Latina. I am my past, I am my present, and I am my future. And through empathy, you'll be able to read me and to see me for who I am and see people that are like me and see people who are marginalized in other communities who may have different experiences than me, but who you can come to learn and appreciate, understand, and respect and value because they are just more than what meets the eye. Thank you so much. I finished. But I did good on time. I had a stopwatch. It was 34 minutes and 11 seconds. I think I did okay.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Elaine, for this your wonderful talk. Your very kind of intimate but also very, illuminating talk. And thank you for sharing your story and for sharing your understanding about how telling these sorts of stories can help provoke positive change amongst people. And so yeah, just thank you so much for leading off this lecture series with this wonderful talk. I do want to at this point open the floor to questions from the chat, or excuse me, from the audience. And I would encourage you, if you have questions, to feel free to raise your virtual hands, and I'll myself or Elaine will call upon you. Or if you're not in the position where you could do that, if you would not feel comfortable doing so, feel free to also put any questions directly into the chat, and I'll read those off for the benefit of the room, and then Elaine could address those. Yeah, please do go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question, or type something into the chat there. Okay, yeah, I'm seeing a question right off the bat from Monica. Please feel free to unmute yourself, turn your video on if you'd like, or not. That's fine as well.
Hello, yes, my name is Monica, and I do have a question for your very, very moving presentation, which has to do a little bit of what I'm currently studying, and I'm just really curious about your experience, because I'm interested in when you were entering education to become your game designer position, when you were in your master's, when you were studying about all of this, did you see that there were other females or even just non-white people in your class and in the community, or did you see that even at that point it's still very male, white dominant?
Yeah, so when I first started school, it was back in 2013. So it was at the it was starting, like women in games was starting to be a thing, because Gamergate was just going on at the same time, and we would have discussions about it in class actually, about how we felt about it and like what was the future after this. Is it worth it being a game designer right now, right? Like all of these things popped up. I was very fortunate that at USC in my master's program, we were only a cohort of 15. And USC was very adamant about diversity and inclusion in many different fronts. So in my cohort, we were actually divided 50-50 men and women. And of course, there was somebody who was non-binary, there was somebody who was queer. So there was a little bit of even that that type of inclusivity. I'm not sure if there was anybody in my cohort of different disabilities that could be representative of, but like I include myself in that bucket because I have amputations, and that happened when I was little. I grew up with it, so to me this is my normal. For other people, it's not their normal, right? If it's that case, I could put myself there. Like there was somebody who was not necessarily able-bodied there, but it was very diverse in my cohort, even back in the day, and that was 2013. I have seen it even get more diverse as the years have gone by. However, that is a very small bubble. We're talking only 15 people in a school of like, the program is maybe 200, 300 students. So it's a smaller pool. When you go into the industry and you go to something like the Game Developers Conference, when it's like 80,000 people from all over the world, that's when you really start seeing the ratios, like the real ratios. And yes, the cis white man is the biggest percentage. It's just how that is. Is there access to programs that may have that? It may be even back in the day, they just got into games in the 90s. Like I know so many people in the games industry who just got into games in the 90s and now are like creative directors, they're heads of studios. And it just happened to be that that's just how the time lapsed for them and where they position themselves in the industry. Now, um, looking into the future, 15, 20 years from now, I do believe then you're going to start seeing people like me in places like directors' roles, because now we had the knowledge and the experience built up to get to that leadership position. And more students are graduating from game development programs, which didn't exist before. So before, it wasn't required to have like a bachelor's in game design or computer science or whatever it may be, but it is starting to become the norm now. And I believe the more students come out who are of diverse backgrounds from these programs and get placed into the industry, the more diverse the teams are going to come. It's just there's no way to escape it anymore, because those are the pool of folks coming in and taking up space in the industry. So I see things changing. It's not going to be perfect, of course. I want to see more women in design. That's something that I don't see often. Even at Brass Lion, it is a diverse studio, and in our team of 11 designers, there's only 2 women. And we're both women of color. So even in a super diverse studio, there's still a lot of dudes. But it's all the matter of like breaking ground where you are at, occupy the space, and also occupy the space for other people and like open doors for them. That's why I love mentoring young designers and young developers, so that they are equipped with the resources and the knowledge that they need to actually get into that interview and convince the recruiter like, hey, I'm good for this job. I have the qualities, I have the capabilities. But that's scary too, for anyone, right? Especially when you're first starting and you have the jitters and you think that you're not enough, and it's the imposter syndrome. But yeah, I'm seeing things changing, but yes, the ratios are just not there right now, and they haven't been for a long time, but people are doing work to get there. And actively making decisions to bring in more people of color, more women, more people of diverse backgrounds into the teams, because that makes for better games. 100%. More unique games come out of people who are not all looking the same and have very similar lived experience, because then everything that you get inspired by is very similar. But if you bring in something that's from outside of that box, the new perspectives that they bring in are so different and fresh. They make for unique systems and unique features. So yeah, that's what I would say. I hope I answered your question.
Very much so. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Still welcoming questions in the chat, or if anybody would like to raise their hands to ask a question, that would be wonderful. Maybe while folks are thinking about it, Elaine, while you were talking, particularly right as you begin to wrap up, you talked about the importance, the power, right, of empathy that we can express right through our creative media production in games and other media. And I want to ask you a little bit more about your thoughts on empathy, and to what extent do you think that games and other media can encourage that empathy, and if you think that there's something about the game or the media that can do that encouraging, like what aspects would you particularly point to as here are some I don't want to reduce it to something so instrumental as some techniques to foster empathy, right? But can you give us any more guidelines or any more pointers around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm going to use the word method. The method that is most used so far is narrative. Being able to tell a story where you are, whether you are listening in to like an NPC having a back and forth, or if it's just voice lines that are getting passed through like barks, or if it's an actual like cutscene or something like that. Those are the ones where it really drives it home. At least it has driven it home for me, like when I'm experiencing games or film. Like film is all about storytelling, and it's such a powerful way to be able to move your heartstrings in different ways, to open your eyes to things that you may have never heard of. So I think narrative would be like the method by which this is used. And there's examples of narrative that are like really intentional about it. So for example, that Dragon Cancer, if anybody has ever played that game, it's a tough game to sit through. And that's because somebody decided that a game was the best experience by which they could express the hurt and the pain that they were going through with their child being diagnosed with cancer, right? And living through that, even just seeing things like it just touches your heart. It's just like, wow, like these people are really, like, really went through it, and the pain of losing a child, like, oh my gosh, right? But then there's a game like God of War Ragnarok, when there's this back and forth relationship between a son and a father that is bickering, and like a lot of anger and resentment going back and forth. And some of that manifests as you're like walking through the field, and you're just like lottie-dotting, and all of a sudden they have like a VO exchange, and you're like, dang, that was deep. Like, I wasn't signing up for this. But like, who cannot relate to having a sour relationship with a parent? Like, we can all relate to that. Even if it's just a sour situation, a sour moment in life with a parent. Or a parent figure or guardian, even if it's not that you had a parent, but somebody that mentored you, somebody that you look up to. We have all gone through that, and they were able to connect the dots there. And that's why they win like narrative awards, and such like that. So I think that would be the primary way by which games are exploring that type of emotional connection with people and empathy, is through storytelling. And whether that be like indirect or direct, it depends on the game, of course. But I think that is the best way to do it, I think, and the most genuine way to do it as well, if you want to do it right.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Storytelling really is very powerful, isn't it? So yeah, a couple of comments in the chat. One question and one comment from Daniel Harley, who is the co-organizer of these events. Thank you, Daniel. Apologies for not giving you a shout out at the beginning. He put a link into the chat with a short survey if for attendees. If you could fill out the short, if you have the time, to 5 minutes to fill out the short survey, it would really help us to express to others the value of talks like Elaine's. So if you do have the time to fill out that short survey, that'd be really appreciated. And then I see from Steph Kent a question. I'll just go ahead and read it out for the benefit of everybody here. Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to join and learn. I worked as a sign language interpreter and noticed so many dynamics around language difference, including both sign language and spoken languages. Do you know of any games that use language difference as part of the narrative? I would love to consider how to create and disseminate games that work with the ideas of language difference as an exciting and effective way to improve communication skills in general.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you
thanks for
so
that
much,
question.
Steph. Yes. So there is a game that I think it came out already, but they use sign language to communicate in the game. Let me see if I can find it really quick. My apologies for going on Chrome right now. It's called Moss, MOSS. That's the name of the game. And they have they worked a lot with, I believe, the deaf and hard of hearing community and ASL consultants and things like that to create the game and have the animations be correct, and actually effectively use it to, storytell. So I think that would be a great game to look into. There is perhaps not like necessarily story driven, but Forza 5, which is a racing game. You would never think about ASL or like accessibility options with a racing game, but the Microsoft team there went above and beyond, where I believe there is a feature where you have an ASL interpreter in the game, and they won the accessibility award at the Game Awards, I believe 2 years ago, for those efforts. Something that had never really been seen before, but they went above and beyond to do that. So that's something to look into too, some accessibility options that have to deal with ASL and like language. I know that when it comes to games, the way that we try to overcome language barrier is by localizing the project. So that is offering the game in multiple languages so that people can read it in their native tongue. Um, Localization is expensive, and particularly indie studios who don't have a lot of financial resources cannot localize their game in multiple languages. It's not feasible. But it's something that I, for myself, have done. At my previous studio, the project that I worked on called Beyond Blue is localized in 15 languages. And I was in charge of that whole localization system and making sure that all the data that we needed was in there correctly. And the biggest issue was the UI, because in different languages, the UI needs to be like this long for a word in English that is only 5 letters. So it's very, very interesting to see like the design challenges that arise from just translating something. So I would also look into localization as well as a means of doing that to see what games out there are going above and beyond when it comes to creating content that is in different languages. Um, but yeah, it's so strange to me because like in film and in books, they're so much more far advanced. Like you go on like Netflix and you go on like Hulu, Amazon Prime or whatever, you watch a movie, bring up the subtitle screen, and there's so many options because it's a standard that has been set to have closed captioning and to have subtitles. But in games, we're so far behind that that's something that nobody apparently has been getting right. Everybody's text is like 8 points, and you're kind of trying to squint on the TV. It's just like, what are you doing? Like, we don't have a standard for a lot of these things that other industries have. But I see that coming in the next few years that people are really focusing in on. If we can provide an experience for everybody, and that includes people who have different types of disabilities, if they can experience our game, we're really expanding our communities and like our player base. And there's so many pros to that. Sure, it costs money. Sure, it takes dev time to do it, but it's so worth it. But if you would like, Steph, please send me an email because I probably can, and some other time when I'm like not on screen, look up some stuff for you in regards to language, both spoken and like sign language when it comes to games. And that way I can give you some resources there, at least to start off.
Yeah, thank you. And I know I'm not the person being asked the questions, but I did just want to throw in a shout out to this game called Sign, a game about being understood. It is a board/analog tabletop game that is modeled on the historical development of sign language in Nicaragua 50 years ago, in which a group of young deaf children, adolescents, essentially came together and developed their own sign language through learning how to communicate with one another. And this game is premised on that historical experience and tries to recreate it to a certain extent. Just something I came across on my own teaching of board game design.
That's awesome.
But yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Are there any other questions for Elaine? If not, I have at least one more, and maybe I can just pose that and maybe give folks some time to think about if they have any other questions. So one thing that you mentioned in your response to Monica actually was the importance of mentoring, and I guess you mentioned this in your talk as well, right? With pivot points. And, of course, people who are racialized or otherwise marginalized often are not privileged to be, welcomed and invited into mentoring relationships. And then in general, particularly in industries like academia, I'm not sure if this applies to games as well, but in industries like academia, there's such a power differential between senior and junior people, right, working in these spaces, that there's a lot of opportunity to either mismentor unintentionally or to intentionally, right, abuse the privileges that come with these sorts of relationships. What are some of the principles that you try to take into your own work mentoring, and or maybe what were some of the ways of mentoring that you most appreciated?
So in my career, or rather, even like in my academic career, like I actually did not have a mentor. Um, Dr. Sanchez was the closest thing to a mentor to me, somebody that encouraged me. But when it came to games, he wasn't a game designer or a developer, so he really couldn't like guide me in that sense. He could guide me in the academics of and research. But when I finally came into the industry, that was one of the things I struggled with the most, was finding somebody who would take some time to sit down with me, um, and care enough to guide me or give me resources and teach me something, right? It's hard to do that. And now that I am older, I can see why. Because a lot of people who are in senior and like more veteran positions, when they clock out of work, they have families, they have hobbies that they want to do. And having one on one time with a stranger is most likely something that they're just not willing to do because they would rather be with their son and daughter. They would rather be with their spouse. They would rather make a game that they're working on or whatever it may be. Um, and honestly, and this is I have come to find this recently, is that just because somebody is very senior does not mean that they are meant to be a mentor and lead, and be an empath, really. I have met many people in the industry who have 20, 30 years of experience as designers, who are creative directors, and honestly, they shouldn't be in those positions because they don't have a single ounce of leadership in their bones. And I hate it. It's like, wow, you really just like yelled at somebody in front of the whole team. Like, what are you doing? Like, that's not how you treat people. That's not how you bring a team together. Like, why would I want to create under somebody who doesn't even respect me, who thinks their way is the only way? And that's not how games work. Um, a game is a melting pot of creative minds coming together in agreement and having common goals. That's what a game is. It's not Hideo Kojima. I have a love-hate relationship with Hideo Kojima, you guys. He's a great creative, but I question his leadership just because like everything's about him all the time. It's like I directed, I screen wrote, I did this, I did that. It's like you and the 300 people you employed to create the game, like you're wild. But that's also the truth with mentorship. There's a lot of awesome people out there who have incredible experience, awesome creatives, but they don't have the heart to sit down with somebody and be like, what do you want to do and how can I help you get there? Um, those people are few and far between. Those people are often people of color because we have been through. Is it okay if I cuss? We have been through crap. We have been through garbage, and we know what that's like. And if we can create a space for you to not feel that way, we will help you get there. So, not to be biased, but I think that if you want to search for a mentor, try to see who's out there in different communities. Who are doing that type of stuff. There's many orgs that are doing mentorships and they are headed by people of color because they want to create these spaces. So spaces like Code Coven, spaces like Cal Marginalized Genders in Gaming, who else is doing cool stuff? Even GDP, like you don't have to be LGBTQIA plus to be an ally and be part of a community and like talk to people in those communities. So that's what I would say. I would say find a community that's doing really great work and creating space and opportunities for that. Plug yourself in there, and the likelihood of you finding somebody who will be empathetic and would want to help you is much higher than if you go on LinkedIn and try to friend request, creative director at such and such, because the likelihood is going to be like, it's going to be a no. Very seldom though. I'm not saying that all leadership and all veterans are like doo-doo heads. Like, it's not the case at all. There are some great people out there, but a lot of them have just been so burned and have experienced so much that they're just not willing to open up their hearts. And that's a big deal, right? There's a lot of like stuff that they have to work work through. Um, but that's what I would say. If I was young, that's what I would do. That's the advice that I would want somebody to give to me. It's like plug yourself into the community, find people who are like-minded, find people who want the same thing, and they will help you get there.
Yeah. Yeah, great advice. I'm particularly like struck by the observation, the experience, right? That often racialized people, other folks who've been marginalized, know how bad it sucks and are often the ones who are willing to step up and help if you can find the right communities. And sort of turning the page from that, there's another question in chat that asked about allyship. So Courtney asks, I'm curious what your perspective is, Elaine, and feel free to others chime in on this as well. But curious what your perspective is, Elaine. But what do you think some of the most effective ways to be an ally to diversity are? I'm not always sure what the best way to help others is who don't have the privilege that I do.
You know, that's a great question because honestly, I find that it's very circumstantial. And it is different per person because not everybody is going to want to be helped and supported in the same way. So I could give you like a suggestion, but what would work for one person is not going to work for another. And that takes time to be empathetic, to read people, to understand people and see what it is that they may need. And if you don't know, ask, hey, how can I support you? How can I uplift you? Is there anything that I can do? That's important. And it's also very affirming to somebody marginalized like me when somebody comes and says, hey, I noticed that I noticed your tweet the other day, or hey, I noticed in the meeting that you looked a little bit like off. Are you okay? Is there anything that I can do? That's very affirming to me. It's like, wow, I feel seen. Somebody's actually like observing what I'm saying, what how I'm looking, like vocabulary and stuff. Like that means the world when somebody takes a little bit of their time to do that. So I would say when you find yourself in situations when you want to make a difference and you don't know how, ask the people how you can do it. Sometimes that is like, hey, show up to an event because people will be like, I'm an ally, yes, and repost an event and then not show up. It's like, okay, dude, like that's not fair. Like let's actually be supportive of each other. Like walk the walk, not just talk it. Um, there's so many people out there with a lot of words, a lot of words. But when it comes time to put action into play, people are not doing it. And like people in marginalized communities like myself, like we deal with that every day when it's Hispanic Heritage Month and everybody and their mother is coming a week before Hispanic Heritage Month to say, hey, what can we do to boost you? Hey, what can we do with you? Um, but we were planning 6 months ahead and we reached out and it was radio silence, you know? So it really stinks. And that doesn't just happen to Latinx and gaming, it happens to everybody. It happens to GGP and during Pride Month. It happens to Black in Gaming during Black History Month. It happens to all of us. And that's just a slap to the face. If we are important, as we should be every single day of the whole year, when it's our time to be celebrated, uplift us by being organized. Please don't just lift me up when the world gives me a platform. Lift me up every day. Like boost events, boost things. Talk to people. Be part of communities, right? You cannot be an ally in isolation. You know what I mean? There's no way for you to help anybody if you are always behind closed doors just doing your own thing. That's not what being an ally means. Being an ally is not having a megaphone and speaking over people who are marginalized. That's not an ally. Ally is actually being there for people like me. standing up for people like me, and showing up. And like I said in my talk, understanding and acknowledging the hurt and stuff that's happening, and being like, hey, I get it. Like, I understand, Elaine, that Puerto Rico is not a state, and you all are second class citizens, and all of this stuff, and you carry that. You carry that identity with you. So when Puerto Rico gets slammed by a hurricane, and my people just want some money for food, and billionaires have mansions and are like loopholing the taxes, and we talk about like our discontent, don't just mute me. You know what I mean? Because I have that happen before. I'm so tired of you talking about the issues of your country. It's important. And if you can boost that, hey, that helps me feel seen. It's like, oh, you're reading about what's going on. Like, that's how you show up. That's how you're an ally. But people get tired when you scroll and it's the same thing over and over and over again. You're like, ugh, this is not my issue. I don't care about this, but there's people that you care about that care about it. So just respect that. And if you don't want to see it, then are you really need to sit down with yourself and be like, what can I do actually to be a real ally, and not just say that I am for clout or to make it look like I care about D&I. Because a lot of how society works now, it's very much appearances. It's like what looks good on the outside, right? And we could go in a rabbit hole of all these things, but what looks on the outside is BS. I could care less if you look pretty and you say all the right things, but behind closed doors, are you actually a good person? Are you doing what you need to do to help people around you? That's way more important, at least to me. But I'm very real, my New Jersey's coming out, the Puerto Rican's coming out, like it's just the attitude that comes with it is like, be real, ally just means equals like be real. Don't just be fake. Everybody else is fake, and that doesn't do any of us any good. Sorry, that was long-winded.
That was great. I especially appreciated how, even though I said we're sort of moving away from like communities of marginalized folks, you did bring it back to like an ally isn't, a lone wolf, right? An ally is working for a community, right? Working for the interests of a community, not trying to speak for them, but trying to do the work that they ask, that the community has asked them to do, to work on. And I think that's incredibly important. So thank you for that. We're running close to the end of our time together. Many of you may have noticed that the event was scheduled from 1 to 3. It was supposed to be scheduled from 1 to 2:30, with some of that space is just buffer space. We'd only asked Elaine to talk for 30 minutes and expected about 30 minutes of questions, and we've kind of done that and a little bit more at this point. So unless there are any last questions that folks really want to get out there, not seeing any hands right now. I will just say if you have 5 minutes, please go ahead and fill out that survey that Daniel put it there at the top of the chat. And whether or not you have 5 minutes for that survey, please join me in saying thank you to Elaine Gomez for this wonderful kickoff talk to this lecture series. Thank you so much, Elaine.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. Thanks, y'all, for listening. I appreciate it.